When the billionaire Adams Ashley died, the world expected tears, especially from his young wife, Suzzy. But instead of mourning, she was busy posting pictures of herself, laughing, dancing in a club on the same day he was being laid to rest. Something even more shocking happened. She didn't show up at his funeral. The internet exploded, calling her heartless, greedy, unforgivable. What she didn't know was that karma was already on its way, and the life she thought she owned was about to crumble, piece by piece. The morning of the funeral came quietly. Gray clouds hung over Los Angeles, the kind that make even the richest homes feel cold. At the gates of the Ashley mansion, black cars lined the driveway. Cameras flashed as guests in dark suits whispered and wiped tears. They said Adams Ashley's death was sudden, a car accident on the Pacific Coast Highway. One moment, he was on a business call. The next, gone. Just 34 years old. Inside the grand hall, his parents sat side by side, Mr. and Mrs. Ashley, holding each other's hands as if they could stop the world from spinning without their son. But through all the grief, one question floated from one whisper to another. Where's Suzzy? The wife, the beautiful young woman everyone thought he adored, was nowhere to be found. The priest cleared his throat. The choir began to sing softly, yet the empty seat beside the casket screamed louder than any song could. Mr. Ashley bowed his head. Mrs. Ashley's eyes stayed fixed on that chair, waiting, hoping. But Suzzy never walked through the doors. And just as the ceremony reached its final prayer, someone's phone buzzed in the crowd. A gasp broke the silence. There, on social media, was a picture. Suzzy, smiling in a club, glass raised high. Caption, "New Beginnings." That was the moment the whispers turned into outrage. The moment a grieving family became a storm of anger and betrayal. And the moment Suzzy Ashley's perfect world began to fall apart.
Across the city, in downtown Los Angeles, Suzzy sat in a VIP lounge. The bass was thumping, lights flashing. Her best friend, Tracy, poured champagne into crystal glasses. "Cheers, baby! You're free now!" Tracy laughed, raising her glass. "No more boring business dinners or pretending to love that serious billionaire stuff. You're young, hot, and loaded." Suzzy smirked, tossing her long blonde hair over her shoulder. "I've spent enough time living like a trophy wife. It's my time now. I earned this life." She pulled out her phone, snapped a picture of herself with her friends, and posted it on Instagram. New chapter, kisses. Hashtag rich widow. Hashtag no regrets. What she didn't realize was that Adams's funeral was being live-streamed on multiple networks, and within minutes, people noticed the post. By the time the casket was lowered into the ground, her picture was already trending on Twitter. Inside the church hall, David, Adams's closest friend and business partner, showed his phone to Mr. Ashley. "Sir, you might want to see this." Mr. Ashley's jaw tightened as he saw Suzzy's photo. The music, the champagne, her bright smile, it all burned his heart. "She's at a club," he whispered, voice trembling, "while my son is being buried." Mrs. Ashley's tears stopped. She turned her head slowly toward her husband and said, her voice sharp as steel, "That woman doesn't deserve a dime of what Adams worked for." Her husband nodded, his expression cold. "Then we'll make sure she doesn't get it." That night, after the burial, the Ashleys sat down with their family attorney, Mr. Carter, a man who had known Adams since his first startup. "Mr. Carter," Mrs. Ashley said, "we need to see the will." Carter opened his leather briefcase, adjusting his glasses. "Well, Adams left most of his estate to Suzzy. But," he paused, "there's a clause." "A clause?" "Yes. If she's proven unfit to care for their children or manage the estate responsibly, Legal guardianship and financial control revert to his next of kin, you. Mrs. Ashley exhaled, her grief giving way to resolve. Then it's time we find out who Suzzy really is. Meanwhile, Suzzy's new life was spiraling fast. The mansion that once echoed with her children's laughter now pulsed with music, clinking glasses, and strangers. She threw parties nearly every night, surrounded by influencers, wannabe celebrities, and men who called her Queen Suzzy. Her two little kids, Eli, 6, and Ava, 4, were left with nannies most of the time. Sometimes they were forgotten, their dinners cold on the table, their bedtime stories unheard. Neighbors began talking, the staff whispered, and soon someone reported her to Child Protective Services. When a social worker showed up one morning, Suzzy was still in her robe, nursing a hangover. "Mrs. Ashley, I'm here to talk about your children." "Can you come back later? I have a shoot in 2 hours." The social worker frowned. "This won't wait, ma'am. We've received several reports about neglect. We'll need to see the children." Suzzy rolled her eyes. "They're fine. Ask the nanny." But that visit was just the beginning. Days later, tabloids exploded with headlines. "Billionaire's widow parties as CPS investigates her for child neglect." "Suzzy Ashley spotted drunk in Hollywood while kids left home alone." The same photo she had proudly posted was now haunting her everywhere. And in the Ashley mansion, Mrs. Ashley sat in silence, scrolling through the chaos. She looked up at her late son's portrait and whispered, "Rest easy, Adams. We'll protect your children and your legacy, even if we have to take them away from her." As the sun set over Los Angeles, Suzzy had no idea that her perfect world was about to collapse, and the family she disrespected was quietly preparing her downfall.
The next morning, Suzzy Ashley sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone. Her Instagram notifications were exploding, not with praise, but with judgment. "You're heartless. Your husband isn't even cold in the ground and you're clubbing? Those poor kids!" She threw her phone across the counter, the screen cracking. "They're just jealous," she muttered under her breath. "They wish they had my life." But her perfect life was starting to unravel faster than she realized. Her husband's company, ATech Global, had frozen all her access to corporate accounts, pending a review. The board didn't trust her decisions, and investors were whispering that Adams would have never wanted her in charge. Bills were piling up. Her so-called friends were still showing up every night, drinking her champagne, eating her food, and laughing at her jokes. But none of them cared that her world was quietly falling apart. At the same time, across town, Mr. and Mrs. Ashley were sitting with attorney Mr. Carter again in a quiet office overlooking downtown Los Angeles. Carter placed a thick folder on the table. "These," he said, "are the reports from the social worker and the private investigator you hired. It's bad." Mrs. Ashley didn't flinch. "Tell me." Carter opened the folder. "Frequent late-night parties, neglect of the children, multiple public intoxications. There's video evidence, photos, and even testimony from one of her nannies who quit last week." Mr. Ashley clenched his fists. "And the kids?" "They're being looked after by a temporary caregiver, but from what we've heard, they're not doing well. They miss their father." Mrs. Ashley closed her eyes for a moment, her voice trembling. "Those babies have already lost their dad. They don't deserve to lose stability, too." Carter nodded. "Then it's time to act. I'll file the petition to challenge Suzzy's control over Adams' estate and request custody of the children." Mrs. Ashley straightened her back. "Let's do it." 2 days later, Suzzy was awakened by the sharp sound of the doorbell. She stumbled to the door, still in her silk pajamas, and found a man in a suit standing there, holding a folder. "Mrs. Ashley." "Yeah?" He handed her the papers. "You've been served." "Served for what?" "Petition to review the estate and custody of your children," he said before walking away. She stared at the papers in shock. "Custody? My kids?" Her voice cracked as she flipped through the legal documents. Her in-laws were suing for custody. The Ashleys wanted her children and her control of Adams's fortune. She grabbed her phone and called her best friend, Tracy. "They're trying to take everything from me." Tracy groaned sleepily. Girl, calm down. It's probably just some legal formality. You're his wife. You'll win. But Suzzy wasn't so sure, because behind her, sitting on the couch, were her kids, little Eli and Ava, eating cereal out of paper bowls, dressed in mismatched clothes, watching cartoons on mute. Their innocence made her chest tighten for a moment. Then she shook the feeling off. No one's taking my life away, she said under her breath. Days turned into weeks. The court hearings began. Reporters filled the steps of the Los Angeles County Courthouse. Every time Suzzy arrived, dressed in designer outfits, sunglasses covering her eyes, the cameras flashed. Mrs. Ashley, do you have any comment about the allegations of neglect? Is it true you were at a Hollywood club the night of your husband's funeral? She said nothing, but silence was its own answer. Inside the courtroom, Mrs. Ashley sat quietly behind her attorney. She didn't need to speak much. The evidence spoke for her. Photos of empty liquor bottles in the mansion, videos of wild parties, witnesses who testified that the children were often left alone for hours. The social worker took the stand. In my professional opinion, she said firmly, Mrs. Ashley is not providing a safe or stable environment for her children. Suzzy tried to defend herself. I'm just grieving. People deal with pain differently. The judge raised an eyebrow. And your way of grieving is hosting parties and posting selfies with champagne bottles. The courtroom fell silent. When the session ended, Suzzy walked out furious. Paparazzi shouted questions, and her face, angry, red, tear-streaked, became front-page news by evening. That night, she sat alone in her mansion. The music was off, the lights dim. The house that had once felt alive now felt cold and empty. Her friends had stopped calling. The party crowd had moved on. Even Tracy hadn't returned her texts in 2 days. And then her phone buzzed with a message, a notification from the court. Temporary custody granted to Mr. and Mrs. Ashley. Her vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. They took my kids, she whispered, her voice cracking. They really took them. She fell to her knees, sobbing, surrounded by designer bags, shattered glass, and silence. Across town, the Ashleys were putting Eli and Ava to bed in a cozy guest room. Mrs. Ashley tucked them in, her hand trembling as Eli looked up and whispered, Grandma, is Mommy mad at us? Mrs. Ashley softened her eyes. No, sweetheart. Mommy just needs some time to figure things out. Eli nodded sleepily. I miss Daddy. Mrs. Ashley smiled sadly. I know, baby. I miss him too. As she turned off the lights, she looked toward the sky and whispered, We're doing right by you, Adams. I promise. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, the sound of an inheritance storm still brewing. Because Suzzy wasn't finished yet. And neither were the Ashleys.
Rain fell softly over Los Angeles that night, tapping against the massive windows of the Ashley mansion. Inside, Suzzy sat alone in her dark living room, mascara streaked down her cheeks, staring blankly at her reflection in the black TV screen. Her phone lay face down on the marble floor. The last message still burned in her mind. Temporary custody granted to Mr. and Mrs. Ashley. She had lost her children. The silence of the mansion, once filled with laughter and music, now felt unbearable. Every tick of the clock echoed like judgment. Those old people think they can just take my kids, my money, my life, she muttered to herself, standing abruptly. They're not winning this, not over me. She grabbed her phone and dialed a number. Tracy, she said, voice trembling with rage. I need a lawyer. A good one, the kind that makes problems disappear. Tracy hesitated on the other end. Suzzy, maybe you should just— Don't maybe me, she snapped. They're trying to make me look like a bad mother. I'm not losing everything because some old couple thinks I'm not good enough. Tracy sighed. I'll call someone, but girl, you need to chill on the clubs and social media. People are turning against you. Suzzy hung up without answering.
She didn't want advice. She wanted revenge. A few days later, she walked into the law firm of Jacob Reynolds, one of Los Angeles's top family attorneys. He was sharp, confident, and known for playing dirty. Exactly what she needed. "I read your file," he said, folding his hands on his mahogany desk. "You're in deep trouble, Mrs. Ashley." Suzzy crossed her legs, flipping her hair. "That's why I'm here. I want my kids back, and my money. Can you make that happen?" Reynolds smirked. "Anything's possible, for the right price." She leaned forward. "Money isn't a problem." He raised a brow. "Oh, I'm sure it's about to be. Your accounts are under review, and the court's frozen several assets, but we'll find a way." He slid a paper across the table. "First step, damage control. You need to clean up your public image, stay off social media, show remorse, attend therapy. Make the judge see you as a grieving widow, not a spoiled party girl." Suzzy's lips curved into a bitter smile. "So you want me to pretend to care?" Reynolds looked her dead in the eye. "No, Mrs. Ashley, I want you to act like you care. There's a difference." For a few weeks, Suzzy tried to play the role. She dressed modestly. She attended parenting classes. She posted heartfelt quotes on Instagram. "Healing takes time, flower, #strongmom," hoping the world would believe her transformation. But underneath, she was still the same woman, angry, entitled, and desperate. And it didn't take long before her mask slipped. One night, paparazzi cameras caught her leaving an exclusive Hollywood club at 2 a.m., stumbling into a car with a well-known music producer. By morning, the headlines exploded again. "Suzzy Ashley's late-night scandal, widow or wild child?" The photos reached the courtroom before she did. Meanwhile, at the Ashleys' home, Eli and Ava were beginning to smile again. Mrs. Ashley packed their lunches, took them to school, read bedtime stories. Mr. Ashley built a treehouse in the backyard, something Adams had always promised to do. Each evening, when the house grew quiet, they sat together and prayed. But Mrs. Ashley's peace was interrupted one afternoon when her attorney called. "Mrs. Ashley, Suzzy's legal team is filing a counter-motion. She's fighting for full custody again." Mrs. Ashley closed her eyes, exhaling deeply. "Of course she is." Mr. Ashley frowned from across the room. "That woman won't stop until she destroys everything." His wife shook her head slowly. "No, she's already doing that to herself." In court, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Suzzy arrived wearing a sleek black suit, her expression cold and defiant. Across the room, Mrs. Ashley sat quietly, holding a photo of her late son in her lap. The judge looked between them. "We've reviewed the new evidence and the recent photographs of Mrs. Ashley leaving a nightclub. Mrs. Ashley, do you have an explanation?" Suzzy straightened. "I was attending a business meeting." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge leaned forward. "At 2 a.m., with alcohol and paparazzi present." Suzzy stammered. "It's not what it looks like." The judge raised a hand. "That's enough. The court finds your lifestyle continues to be unstable and unfit for the well-being of your children. Custody remains with Mr. and Mrs. Ashley." Suzzy's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't do this! They're my kids!" The judge's tone softened, but stayed firm. "They need a home, Mrs. Ashley, not a headline." When court adjourned, Suzzy stormed outside, surrounded by flashing cameras. "Mrs. Ashley, do you have a comment? Are you losing control of your late husband's estate? Do you regret not attending his funeral?" She froze. That last question hit her like a bullet. Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, she had nothing to say. That night, back in her now half-empty mansion, Suzzy wandered through the halls like a ghost. Her reflection followed her in every mirror, the same woman who thought money made her untouchable. Now she had everything she once wanted: designer clothes, a mansion, fame, and yet she had nothing that truly mattered. As she walked into the nursery, the silence was deafening. The toys were gone, the beds were empty. Only the faint smell of baby lotion lingered in the air. Suzzy sank to the floor, holding one of Ava's teddy bears to her chest. For the first time, the tears weren't for herself. They were for the life she'd thrown away. Outside, lightning flashed across the city skyline, a silent reminder that storms never last forever, but they always leave scars.
Suzzy didn't sleep well that night. Halfway into the night, her eyes flipped open, her head full with thoughts of what her life might become if she lose the case. She remained awake until the morning light crept through the tall glass windows of her mansion, but the brightness only revealed how empty the place had become. The once bustling house was now silent. No laughter, no music, no footsteps of children running through the hallways. Only Suzzy, alone, sitting on the floor of her bedroom, surrounded by unopened mail and eviction notices. The banks had frozen her accounts, the board of ATEC Global had officially removed her from all financial access to Adams Holdings, her lawyers had resigned, claiming she couldn't afford their retainer anymore. And her friends? They had disappeared like smoke. Tracy, the one person she thought would always stick around, had stopped answering her calls. For the first time since Adams died, Suzzy realized she wasn't powerful. She was just alone. That afternoon, she drove her black Mercedes down Sunset Boulevard, her sunglasses barely hiding her swollen eyes. Billboards of rich, smiling faces stared down at her, people who still had what she lost: image, power, admiration. She pulled into a cafe she and Adams used to visit on Sunday mornings. As she sat down, she caught sight of a family nearby: a man, a woman, two little kids laughing over pancakes. Her chest tightened. For a moment, she thought she saw Adams sitting there, smiling the way he used to when she made fun of his serious work calls. She blinked, and the image vanished. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "You deserved better than me." The waitress walked over gently. "You okay, ma'am?" Suzzy forced a smile. "Yeah, just remembering." But as she left a few minutes later, her card was declined, twice. The embarrassment burned deeper than any headline ever could. Meanwhile, across town, Mr. and Mrs. Ashley were finalizing control over their son's estate. In a quiet conference room overlooking downtown Los Angeles, their lawyer, Mr. Carter, slid a stack of documents toward them. "It's done," he said. "By court order, you're now the legal guardians of both Eli and Ava and custodians of Adam's assets until they reach adulthood." Mrs. Ashley's hands trembled as she signed her name. "He worked so hard for all this," she whispered. "He trusted her and she just—" Mr. Ashley placed his hand over hers. "We can't change what happened, but we can protect what's left." That evening, the Ashleys took Eli and Ava to visit their father's grave. Eli held a small bouquet of blue flowers, his dad's favorite color. "Grandma," he asked softly, "does Daddy know we're here?" Mrs. Ashley smiled through tears. "I think he does, sweetheart. I think he's been watching you the whole time." Ava placed her tiny hand on the tombstone. "I miss Mommy, too," she said quietly. Mrs. Ashley's heart ached. "We all do, honey." Because despite everything Suzzy had done, deep down she was still their mother. And no matter how broken she was, the children still loved her. Innocent hearts always do. Back in her empty mansion, Suzzy sat in front of a laptop, scrolling through endless news articles about herself.
Billionaire widow loses custody, fortune, and friends in dramatic fall. Once glamorous socialite faces foreclosure. Her hands trembled as she slammed the laptop shut. She walked through the house, past the grand piano no one played, the designer furniture collecting dust, the pool where she once threw parties, and stopped in front of a framed photo on the wall. It was their wedding picture. Adams in his black tuxedo, smiling proudly, her, radiant and full of dreams. But as she stared at it, she could barely recognize the woman she used to be. She whispered, "I thought money meant freedom. I thought it meant I'd never feel small again." Her voice broke. "But I've never felt smaller." Days later, the mansion was officially listed for sale. Realtors came and went, workers packed boxes. The marble floors echoed with emptiness as Suzzy watched strangers take away her life piece by piece. She kept only one thing, a small silver photo frame with a picture of Eli and Ava at the beach, smiling with Adams. As the moving trucks drove off, Suzzy stood in the driveway, holding the frame to her chest. The wind blew through her hair, cold and sharp. A neighbor across the street whispered to another, "That's her, the billionaire's wife who lost it all." She heard them, and for once she didn't fight it, because deep down she knew they were right. That night she checked into a modest apartment downtown, peeling paint, a flickering light in the hallway, and a broken elevator, a far cry from the mansion she once called home. As she sat on the edge of the bed, she heard children laughing outside the window. It made her smile and cry at the same time. She whispered to herself, "I'm going to fix this, somehow. I'll become someone my kids can be proud of." For the first time in a long time, the anger was gone. What replaced it was something new. Guilt, humility, maybe even hope. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time she understood that money couldn't heal what her heart had broken. And across town, as Mrs. Ashley watched Eli and Ava sleeping peacefully, she whispered a quiet prayer. "God, help Suzzy find her way back, not to the money, but to herself." Outside, the city lights shimmered like stars. Two worlds, one rebuilding, one rediscovering, silently connected by the man they both lost. The storm had passed, but the lesson was only beginning.
Days had passed. Suzzy Ashley stood in front of her cracked bathroom mirror, inside the small downtown apartment. Hair pulled into a messy bun, eyes red but focused. The woman staring back at her didn't look like a billionaire's widow anymore. No diamonds, no makeup, no filters. Just Suzzy. And for the first time, that was enough. She whispered to her reflection, "If I made this mess, then I can clean it up." A second chance. The first step was work. Real work. A former nanny who still felt sorry for her told Suzzy about a small nonprofit on the East Side that helped single mothers find jobs. Suzzy showed up the next day, humbled, filling out forms like everyone else. When the volunteer coordinator asked, "Any special skills?" Suzzy hesitated. She had once run charity events, planned galas, managed press interviews for Adams. She wasn't useless. She'd just forgotten who she was before the money. "I'm good with people," she said softly, "and organizing things." Within a week, she was volunteering, sorting donated clothes, packing meals, helping women who reminded her of herself before all the luxury. At first, people whispered when they recognized her. "That's the billionaire's wife," one woman murmured. But Suzzy didn't run. She smiled politely and kept working. Every box she lifted, every bag she packed,
felt like a small piece of redemption. Letters that never sent. Each night she sat at her little table with a cup of tea and wrote letters to Eli, to Ava, to Adams. Dear Eli, today I helped a mom find clothes for her baby. She cried and I realized how lucky I once was. I'm trying to be better for you and Ava. Dear Adams, I finally understand what you meant when you said love is responsibility, not reward. I wish I'd listened sooner. She never mailed them, but she kept them all in a small box labeled Someday. Months passed. Suzzy kept her head down, her social media deleted, her priorities clear. Then one afternoon, as she was stacking food boxes at the nonprofit, she heard a familiar voice behind her. Excuse me, are you Mrs. Ashley? She froze. Turning slowly, she saw Mr. Carter, the Ashleys' lawyer. He looked older, gentler than she remembered. I thought you might be here. Mrs. Ashley asked me to check in on you. Suzzy's voice was cautious. Why? Because she believes people can change, he said simply, and she's seen that you're trying. Tears welled in her eyes. How could she even forgive me after everything? Carter smiled softly. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's hope. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter from Mrs. Ashley. Suzzy, I've watched from a distance. I see the work you're doing, and I want you to know Adams would be proud of this version of you. If you'd like, the kids would love to see you, supervised at first, just so they can reconnect. I believe in second chances. Margaret Ashley. Suzzy's hands trembled as she read it. A sob escaped her lips, not of sadness, but relief. For months, she had begged herself for forgiveness. Now someone else was giving her a chance to prove she deserved it. The first meeting. The following weekend, Suzzy arrived at a quiet park in Pasadena. Her heart pounded as she spotted Mrs. Ashley sitting on a bench with Eli and Ava beside her. Ava saw her first. Mommy! Suzzy froze. Hi, baby. Ava ran into her arms, small and warm and real. Suzzy held her tight, breathing in the scent of her daughter's hair, whispering, I missed you so much. Eli was slower. He stood close to his grandmother, studying Suzzy carefully. It's okay, Mrs. Ashley said gently. Go say hi. Eli walked up, clutching a small toy car. You remember this, Mom? Suzzy smiled through tears. Of course I do. Daddy gave you that on your 5th birthday. He nodded. You look different. I am different, she said honestly. But I'm still your mom, and I'm trying to be better. Mrs. Ashley watched quietly, tears glistening in her eyes. For the first time there wasn't anger between them, just understanding. They sat together on that bench, talking about small things, school, cartoons, favorite foods. But beneath it all was something bigger. Forgiveness quietly taking root. A promise made. As the sun dipped low, Eli leaned against Suzzy's arm and said, Can we see you again? Suzzy looked to Mrs. Ashley. Mrs. Ashley nodded. One step at a time. Suzzy smiled. Then one step is all I need. When they left, Suzzy stayed on the bench a while longer, watching the playground lights flicker on. She whispered to the sky, Thank you, Adams, for not giving up on me, even from wherever you are. That night, back in her apartment, Suzzy opened the box labeled Someday. She placed the newest letter inside, one addressed to herself. Dear Suzzy, you finally learned that love isn't something you buy, it's something you build. Don't stop now. She smiled, wiping away tears. Outside, the city hummed with life. For the first time in a long time, Suzzy didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was living.
It's 1 year after the death of the billionaire. Los Angeles had rolled through another cycle of sunshine, rain, and neon nights. In that time, Suzzy Ashley had quietly rebuilt a life. Not the kind that made headlines, but the kind that made sense. She still lived in her small apartment, still volunteered 3 days a week, and now worked part-time as an event coordinator for the very nonprofit that had first helped her. The staff respected her for her focus and humility. No one called her the billionaire's widow anymore. She was just Suzzy, the woman who showed up early and stayed late. Every other weekend she saw Eli and Ava at the park, at first supervised, then freely. The kids no longer looked nervous around her. They laughed, tugged her sleeves, told her stories about school. They were growing, healing, and so was she. A knock at the door. One afternoon, as she finished writing reports at her kitchen table, there was a knock. When she opened the door, Mrs. Ashley stood there, holding a small basket of cookies. "Mrs. Ashley," Suzzy breathed, smiling in surprise. "Call me Maggie," the older woman said. "May I come in?" The two women sat at the little table that once held piles of unpaid bills. Now it held mugs of tea. Maggie looked around the tidy apartment and nodded with quiet approval. "You've made it nice." "Thank you," Suzzy said. "It's small, but it's home." There was a pause before Maggie spoke again. "Eli told me he wants you to come to his school play next week. I thought maybe we could all go together." Suzzy's eyes filled instantly. "You'd be okay with that?" Maggie reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "We've all been through enough punishment. Adams wouldn't have wanted his family split forever. I think he'd rather see us working together." Suzzy couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. The school play. The following Friday, the small elementary auditorium buzzed with parents and cameras. The lights dimmed, and a cardboard spaceship rolled onto the stage. Eli appeared, wearing silver foil and a big grin. "I'm Captain Cole, and today we're saving the galaxy!" Suzzy laughed through her tears, clapping louder than anyone. Beside her, Maggie smiled proudly. For a moment, they were simply two mothers watching a child shine. After the play, Eli ran to them. "Mom! Grandma! Did you see me?" Suzzy kneeled, hugging him tight. "You were amazing, Captain Cole." Maggie chuckled. "Your daddy would have loved that." At the mention of Adams, they all grew quiet. Then Suzzy looked up at the sky visible through the gym windows and whispered, "He still does." The foundation. Months later, Suzzy used her experience at the nonprofit to start a small project in Adams' name, the A&S Hope Fund, offering grants for single parents who wanted to learn new skills or start businesses. She invited Maggie to the launch ceremony. When Suzzy took the stage, her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Once I thought success was money, but when I lost everything, I learned success is what you give, especially when you don't have much left. My husband, Adams Ashley, taught me that even without knowing it, and my children reminded me what love actually means." The applause was soft but heartfelt. Maggie wiped her eyes in the front row. Full circle. Later that evening, Suzzy drove out to the cemetery. The sky was streaked with gold as the sun dipped behind the hills. She placed fresh lilies on Adam's grave and sat cross-legged in the grass. "Hey," she whispered, "I kept my promise. The kids are good. Your mom's, well, she's my best friend now, believe it or not." She smiled through a tear. "I finally understand what you built, Adams. It wasn't just the company. It was the people, the family, the values. That's the real legacy." A warm breeze brushed across her face, and she could almost hear his calm laugh, that gentle teasing voice saying, "Took you long enough." She laughed softly. "Yeah, took me a while." The moral. That night, Suzzy wrote the final entry in her journal. "I used to think losing everything was the end of my story, but it was really the beginning. Money can buy a mansion, but not a home. Fame can fill a room, but not a heart. Real wealth is the love that stays when the crowd is gone." She closed the notebook, turned off the light, and for the first time in years, slept peacefully. Across town, in the Ashley household, Eli and Ava hung a new family photo on the wall. Grandma Maggie in the center, Suzzy beside her, the kids laughing between them. The circle was complete. And somewhere beyond the noise of the city, the spirit of Adams Ashley finally rested easy. His family, broken and rebuilt, had found its way back to love.